welcome everyone to another Off-Grid Ireland 𝗃_space discussion. Tonight, we're delighted to be joined by our next guest, Kevin Flanagan. Kevin is the founder and instructor of Brehon Academy, a platform dedicated to reviving awareness and appreciation of early Irish history, mythology, culture, and legal system, better known as Brehon law. With a passion of connecting the past to the present, Kevin established the Academy in 2013 as a digital heritage school to educate others about Ireland's ancient heritage. Kevin also holds a bachelor's degree in law from UCD and a master's degree in politics, philosophy, and economics. Kevin has spoken at many global conferences, academic symposiums, and folk festivals about Brehon law. Welcome, Kevin. We're delighted to have you on with us tonight. And just for anyone that would like to follow Kevin's socials, you'll find him on YouTube, and his website is www.brehonacademy.org for all of his online courses. He runs a lot of courses, on Brehon law and our traditions and ancient mythology. And I do recommend the listeners on here to give Kevin a follow, but also as well maybe explore some of his courses, because you will not get a better understanding of who we are as a people. So it's very important, you guys, if you give him a follow. And Kevin is also on Twitter as well, and on Facebook at Brehon Academy. So look at Kevin, we're absolutely delighted to have you with us this evening.
I'm delighted to be here as well. So thanks for the invitation to yourself and go on. I've actually been a long time listener of the space, and I'm a big fan of what you guys are doing here. So keep up the good work.
Yeah, Kevin, before we touch base on the Brehon law, I just want to, I hope you don't mind. I was watching one of your videos there recently, and I know you mentioned that you're based over in the Ukraine, and things kind of got a bit hot and heavy over there, and you had to leave. I was just wondering, how are things now? Are you back again, or are you over here? If you don't mind, if it's too personal, you don't have to say anything.
No, I don't mind, but yeah, I was in Ukraine when the war started, and we evacuated and we came to Ireland back in 2022. Throughout that year, I was on the road. I was traveling a lot with my job. So, but right now, I'm actually back in Ireland. I don't know if you're aware of this, but I recently had a brain tumor. So I just had an operation back in September. And I had a touch of dysphasia, so I had to relearn how to speak all over again. So you'll forgive me if I have any long pauses or something like that, or if I'm stuttering. So it's been a crazy couple of years, to be honest, but I'm kind of used to it now at this stage,
Oh, I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry to hear that. I didn't know, but Jesus, fair play to you for continuing your work and speaking with us this evening. It's an absolute credit to you. So look, we'll kick off the chat. So basically, my first thing is, you might give us. I know it's a long subject, but you might give us a brief synopsis on Brehon law and law of the free man. And basically on a rough time period, if you could give us just kind of a rundown on Brehon law, and then I'll pop in with questions, because I think the questions will kind of relate a little bit better with your introduction on Brehon law as well.
Okay, that sounds perfect. Thanks very much. The Brehon laws were written down from around the 5th, 6th, 7th century AD onwards, but the language in them suggests to us that they're actually a lot more ancient than that. And the mythologies, which were also written down in that time, the way the Brehon laws actually worked is that they were polycentric, which meant that the laws were created and determined by the people themselves. And that's very different than what we have today, which is a top-down system where the Taoiseach, or in the earlier times, the Crown of England, the British Crown, would make a law. Now, that was an alien system to the early Irish. So I have a theory that prior to this like Protestant and Catholic situation, which, you know, has really defined our modern history, if you go back far enough, the English were Catholic as well. But there was a clash going on there. So I describe this as a clash of legal systems, a clash of legal ideologies, let's say. And that comes back to the fact that the Irish, in their nature, they just couldn't understand that a king would make a law and put the law on them. Now that sounds very strange, I know, to modern Irish ears, because we're just so used to the situation the way it is now. And it's interesting, like we elect a government and their job is to make laws. And those laws are put onto the people. So that's a strange thing, because in the Brehon laws, the laws were of the people or for the people. But nowadays, the laws are on the people. So, yeah, just to kind of wrap this point up a bit, and you can ask another question. We're talking about like 5th, 6th, 7th century, more so like the 6th, 7th century, we have manuscripts. And they cover a lot of things. They cover everything from neighborhood and marriage and divorce and beekeeping and all of that sort of good stuff. And so it's not like we don't have anything written down, but the tradition was oral. So the manuscripts that we have, they're quite complicated to understand today if you're not like legally trained. And I am, like you mentioned at the start, and I appreciate that, the bio you gave me there. I am, like, I have a law degree, so technically I am legally trained. But even for me, understanding these manuscripts, and I don't speak Irish, you know, I'm learning Irish, but I don't speak it fluently. So I'm at a real disadvantage there. But when I view these manuscripts, it's very hard for me to get my head around them as well. So that's one of the issues with studying Brehon law today, and that's probably why not a lot of people are doing it, you know. So so you have the language issue, you also have the amount of it. There's quite a lot of it to go through. It's quite complex and knotty to get your head around. And so, but before that, prior to that, it was an oral system, which meant that the laws were passed down through memory. And if you wanted to be a Brehon, and previously, like the Brehons and the storytellers and the Druids, they were all in the same class of people. There was no distinction between them. But if you want to specialize as being a Brehon, it would take about 20 years of study for you to become what we would consider today to be a professor of law, to be a very experienced and very well educated master of law. So even though we have these manuscripts, and 𝗵𝗵𝗶𝘀, he collected them all in what's now called like the Corpus Juris Hibernicae. Even though we have all these manuscripts, they're very difficult to work with if you are, you know, not legally trained. So because I was studying law, and I had an interest in this. Now, this is going back to, oh gosh, I think I graduated in 2013. I had an opportunity to do a bit of research that would incorporate the Brehon law into what I was doing in like modern legal studies. And so I decided to pick the topic of abolishing prisons, because one of the interesting features of the Brehon law is that there was no prisons. There was no enforcement mechanisms. And so I looked at that and I thought, well, that could be an interesting topic. I think I'm going to talk about that. And so that's what I did. I put together a paper. It was accepted for Trinity College Law Colloquium. This is back in 2012. And I was selected to speak at this event, which was the first time I ever spoke about Brehon law in a public setting, you know. Yeah, I decided to pick a topic that would be controversial and shocking to an audience who hadn't really given much thought to prisons and how we do punishment in the country. And the way I did it is I kind of outlined what are the rationales for prison, and then I said, are there any rationales that we could, or is there any alternatives to prison that would still meet these rationales? So that was my kind of like first foray into talking about Brehon law. And then when I graduated in 2013, I decided, look, there's not a lot of people know about these laws, so I'm going to put it on myself to set up a website, and that's why the Brehon Academy it's called now, but it used to be called Brehon Law Academy. Just because I had this interest, and I see on the comment that you put on Twitter there, I'm not sure who, I think it was like 𝗃𝗏𝗀, that I'm an expert. I don't consider myself an expert, okay? I can tell you the names of some like really good experts like Dr. Fergus Kelly and so on and so forth, Owen McNeill and John O'Donovan and all of these great scholars who came before me who are fluent in Irish. So I can't consider myself an expert because I'm not fluent in the language. So the way I look at it is I'm the guy who popularizes these ideas that that these mighty scholars, you know, have put forward before me, and but they mightn't be as accessible. So I try to make the ideas more accessible by writing blog posts, by setting up the online courses that you mentioned, by my YouTube channel, by my Facebook page, and even though it's called Brehon Academy, it's kind of a way to honor and identify early Irish culture and society.
You sell yourself short, Kevin. There, I've been following you for quite a long time, and I just think you bring this subject to the ordinary people. You're able to bring it down into a simplistic way that people can understand. Sometimes with academia, the knowledge is there, the research is there, and they have a true, in-depth knowledge of our ancient culture. But sometimes it's quite difficult because they're speaking so academically. You can sometimes lose track of where they're going. But you make things so simple. And you have such a love of your culture and your traditions, and it comes across and it engages with the listener on all of your videos. People are automatically, engaged with the subject because you push it across so transparent, so easily, so it's so easy, so people can grasp it. So I guess my first question to you is, how did the Brehon law system work without a central government like we have today? Like, what was the structures?
Yeah, so let me just describe it like this. There was a society, and there was people engaging in the society. They were conducting their day-to-day affairs, and over time, if a certain practice would arise within the community, and if that practice was seen to be good, it would become a norm. And once it became a norm, over time, it would become an expectation. And then when it has been around since time immemorial, right, it would acquire the force of law. So it was a very polycentric system in the sense that you can have different types, you could have a variation in the law and a variation in the practices when you move from community to community. Now that I should say at this point that there was a difference between what we call the coin law and the 𝗺𝗲𝗃. And the 𝗺𝗲𝗃 is more the local law, okay, and that could have variation. So how did it work? Well, basically you would have, as I said, a custom becomes a norm and a norm becomes a law when it has been around since time immemorial. And they also had this very poetic way of talking about the law, that it was as old as the rocks or as old as the hills. Now, let me let you in on a little secret. When they say time immemorial, that's only 3 generations. Because by the time the 3rd generation comes around, the law had been in place beyond memory. And that's where they got this since time immemorial from. Now, what I also want to say is that there is a such thing as true judgment, okay? And the Brehons okay, basically the Brehons had to pay a bit of like a surety that if they gave a false judgment, the two parties of the dispute would take the surety that the Brehon put up, right? And they would divide it between themselves and they'd go and find another Brehon. So this was really important because it meant that the Brehons were constrained by their own reputation, and financially they stood to lose if they gave a false judgment. Now, how did they find the true judgment? Well, this is why I get so passionate about it, because it's really beautiful when you think about it. They looked to nature for a principle that they could apply to the facts of the case. And if they could find a principle in nature, then it was assumed to be true because it was found in nature. So I think an example here would be the first copyright case that ever happened in Ireland. And I don't know if your listeners know this, but like, copyright law began in Ireland about 1,000 years before the Statute of Anne, which basically recognized copyright in the English context. But it happened in Ireland like many years ago, and it was a dispute between Columcille and St. Finian. Now, Columcille was St. Finian's student, and this was a dispute about a book called the Psalter of St. Jerome, which Finian owned. Okay, Columcille or Columba took it upon himself to make a copy of that book, and Finian was really, not happy about this, so he decided to take Columba to the Brehon. Now, the Brehon's judgment was, to every cow its calf, to every little book its big book, which in the Irish, they wouldn't say, 𝗰𝗵𝗶𝘀, they'd say 𝗁𝗁. So it's a single word for a small book. And so, okay, this is kind of interesting because he looked for the principle in nature that every cow who gives birth to a calf, that calf belongs to the cow. And if a book produces a little book, the book belongs to the big book. Now, remember I said that there was no enforcement mechanism in Ireland. This is what led to what's called the Battle of the Book, or the Battle of 𝗃𝗄𝗃. And basically, both sides, both factions raised armies and they went to battle. So the judgment of the Brehon was enough to compel people, in ordinary circumstances to kind of obey or to follow what his pronouncement was. And that's because there was a belief that what the judge was saying, what the Brehon was saying, was divinely inspired, that he was pulling on a principle of nature and he was speaking it, and they always gave a judgment in a poem, which added to this kind of divine nature of the judgment. But in this circumstance, he couldn't avert the war from happening. So if you know who I'm talking about, St. Columba, he actually put himself into exile. He went to Iona, he set up a monastery in Iona, and that's a whole other story. But they look for principles in nature to, validate their judgment. I can give you one more. 𝗁𝗵𝗶𝘀, his father was Art McEwen, and he was killed in battle while Cormac's mother was pregnant with Cormac. And so because his father was killed in battle, he was raised in secrecy. And one day he decides to go to the hill of Tara. And what was his name? The king's name? Anyway, the king who had killed his father, Cormac came to Tara, and he found a court case was happening. And in those days, court case happened in the open air, so everybody could hear it. And what had happened was there was a widow woman who had a sheep, and that sheep was her livelihood. But the sheep got away from her and they trespassed into the queen's crops, which were very expensive crops for dyeing clothes. I think they were woad. and so the queen was like offended by this, because that was very expensive. That was her crops, and she wanted compensation. So she called on her husband to hear the case, which was pretty normal back then, because kings were expected to have the judgment of a Brehon, what we might say today, the judgment of King Solomon. They would have said back then that the good judgment was a kingly trait. So basically, the king heard the case and he said, okay, well, you've suffered a loss, my queen, and she has a sheep, so the sheep should be offered in payment for the crops that have been lost. And Cormac, hearing this, he said, that's not the true judgment, that's a false judgment. As the fleece grows on the sheep, so does the fleece grow on the land. So she should give the fleece of the sheep as restitution, rather than deprive her of her livelihood. And all the people in the crowd said that this was the true judgment. And the king, he began to dislike Cormac at that point. It wasn't until much later when, through the king's bad judgment, the people kind of expelled him, you know, because if the king is bad judgment, the crops don't grow. They lose in battle. They, you know, the king doesn't offer hospitality to people. And so that was the difference between, say, the Irish system and the continental system, which is, in continental Europe, you had title, and the title was passed down to the eldest born, firstborn, usually male, but it changed to either gender a couple of hundred years ago. But traditionally, it was like the firstborn male, and that's called primogeniture. But in Ireland, you were the king because you had the support of your people. You had the support of the clans, let's say. So that's how the king, the previous king that I mentioned, who was the judge in that case, that's how he got ousted, because he lost the support of his people. And then Cormac was basically recognized as king later on. And so that's two cases that I'm after giving you there, that applied principles in nature to make the case to say this is the true judgment. The first one was the cow is every cow has its calf, and the second one was, as the fleece shall grow on the sheep, so does the fleece regrow on the land, and so the fleece should be given as payment. And these are this is the way that the Brehons were thinking back then, you know, and these cases would have been used as precedent. And the same way we learn legal precedent today in university, these cases were referred to as precedent.
Yeah. Why do you think, Kevin, did our people at the time respect the Brehons as legal experts? Like, what was what was the philosophy around the people that they pretty much went with whatever the Brehon ruled or said?
Yeah, I would say that it has a lot to do with our respect for education and the learned classes. So there was a king called King 𝗺𝗺𝗺, and he basically instituted a rule about the number of colors you could wear in the garment in your clothes. And say, I can't remember exactly the numbers, but let's say the royal family had 5 colors. The next were the learned classes, and they had 4 colors. And then it was the warriors. So I think that that's a factor, that they had such respect for educated people. And then, like what I said before, it's that the way they were speaking, they told the judgment in poetry. And but when I told that story, Patricia, did you feel the difference in what I said between, like, oh, the king said, I'm going to give the sheep as a payment, but then Cormac said, no, give the fleece as payment because the crops regrow on the land? Like, I'm asking you, Patricia, but I'm also directing it to your audience. Like, I hope that you felt something when I said that, because that's what really inspired the early Irish, is that they could feel the difference between a good judgment and a poor judgment. Now, I also mentioned before that the Brehon had a lot to lose if he was found to have uttered a false judgment. He could lose his reputation, and back then reputation was everything, and he could lose financially because he's going to lose the amount of what do you call it, surety that he puts up for the case.
Yeah, that's one thing that I feel about our country and our people. It's emotions, you know. We thrive on, you know, including, you know, our nature, you know, everything around us in how we operate. And you know, your point there was 100%. I immediately felt it, you know, like even today, you know, we see the legal system, and they're giving out such harsh punishments, and not enough punishments as well. And you can feel it resonate in your soul when you hear these cases, and you know the right judgment hasn't been passed. So you're 100%
Exactly.
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, did Brehon law balance individual rights with the needs of the community?
Let me say it like this, that the individual wasn't as important as the clan. So what does that mean? Like, it wouldn't be me as an individual against you as an individual. It'd be our clans. So that would ensure a couple of things, right? Knowing that my aunties and uncles are gonna have to pay for my crimes would cause me to behave a little bit better in society. Excuse me. So yeah, our clans. So once we had a court case, let's say I injured you somehow, it would be your whole clan that would be the respondent in the suit. Now, I should say that Ireland had a sort of a caste system. It was a very hierarchical system, and you had the kings at the top, then you had the fleadh or the nobles, then you had the boara, who were basically farmers who had a lot of cattle. Then you had the 𝗀𝗀𝗀, and below them you had the 𝗵𝗵𝗆 or the 𝗁𝗵𝗆. Okay, so they're basically like peasant farmers. 𝗀𝗀𝗀 could be bonded or unbonded. So a dare is a bonded 𝗀𝗀𝗀, and 𝗁 is a free 𝗀𝗀𝗀, and so on and so forth. Now, the difference between our system and, say, India's system is that we have social mobility, meaning that you could increase your grade if you sustained your wealth for 3 generations. And here's the thing, the title, you didn't get the title from the king. You got the title because you earned that title over time. You couldn't do it in 1 generation. You had to raise your wealth to a certain amount and then sustain it for 3 generations. And then you could, like, buy what am I trying to say? As a matter of fact, you would then be like a boara, or you could even raise yourself up to the level of fleadh, which is a noble. So how did you do that? Well, you kind of had to become a lender. You had to become a, you know, somebody who had enough wealth to then start lending it out to the farmer down the road, the 𝗀𝗀𝗀 or the Dair 𝗀𝗀𝗀 down the road, and they're going to pay you tribute. So if you're a farmer who is like getting a lot of tributes, you will then accumulate more wealth over time. It's basically like investing. You know what I mean? You put your stock in that farm down there. They're going to turn that into extra value, and you'll get a couple of liters of milk or a few jars of honey or whatever out of that. So in the Irish law, there is a famous saying, which is fair, fair a 𝗁𝗏, right? Which basically means a man is better than his birth, which, if you read into that, it means that you're not going to be in that basically socioeconomic class forever, right? You're not going to spend your whole life. You could, and you could actually go down in grade as well if you didn't sustain your wealth, right? But in that sense, you were treated as an individual. But in the law, you were treated as a clan, and that's kind of the way it was. I would say this: the clan is I would consider the clan to be a little bit like a modern company that has a logo, that has a slogan, and that has shareholders. But the shareholders are the members of the clan. So that's why if you, God forbid, were murdered, your clan would be the injured party, because it'd be like me chopping off a finger of my own hand. Your clan needs to be the one to say, that's my finger, that's my relative that you're just after killing. So you need to compensate us for that loss, right? Now, if you as an individual couldn't compensate for that loss, then the burden of paying that fine would automatically fall to your kin group. Okay. And so here's the thing: if you were, a little courier and you were running around and you were causing all these problems, I don't think your family is going to want to continue paying for your crimes. So there is an act where the family could disown the individual. And in those cases, if I as an individual couldn't afford to pay the fine, then I would become that other family's indentured servant, basically. And they could do with me whatever they wanted. They could even kill me if they wanted to. Now, I don't think that happened too often, but the option was always there. But what tended to happen more so is that I would become basically a indentured servant to that family. And they could, as I said, do with me whatever I want. Now, probably I would just be put to work on the land. But I'm sure that there are cases where if you're like abandoned by your family, you don't have any protection. So you'd become an outlaw, and that puts you like outside of the law, because you had turned your back on the law, the principles that was actually designed to protect you. But because of your actions and your decisions, and your family as well, like they had to turn their back on you. You have already placed yourself outside the law. So you're beyond the law's reach and you're beyond the law's protection.
Kevin, would you be able to explain honour price? In 2025, we deal with fines or punishments. So what was honour price in Brehon law?
Yeah, so honour price in Brehon law, it was a variable that judges could use, and it was the amounts were set by law. Okay. And it's really interesting that I'm glad you asked me this question, because come back to the question you were asking me previously about today's justice system. It feels wrong. It feels messed up. Like, it feels unjust. And that's really important, that it feels just. Let me say this. There was a Attorney General for Ireland back in the day, right? Back in the 1600s, early 1600s, called Sir John Davies. And he said, "There is no nation of people under the sun that does love equal and indifferent justice better than the Irish, nor will they rest better satisfied with the execution thereof. Even if it be against themselves, they'll have the protection and the benefit of the law when upon just cause they do desire it." What does that mean? It basically means that the Irish people back then, and he was a guy that was basically instrumental in abolishing the Brehon law, but still he had such nice words to say about Irish people, and their relationship to law and justice. And how I interpret that, what he said was that even if the judgment is against themselves, they still rejoice in it because they understand the principle of law. And if the roles were reversed, if they were the plaintiff, they would feel happy with the judgment. Okay, so that's 1600s, and now we're at 1950s. Okay, and this is a barrister speaking on the Irish irreverence for law now. R.W. Bentham, his name was. And he says Irish irreverence for law does not stem from sympathy with crime or wrongdoing in general, but rather from the fact that the Irish, who have a longish memory, know that the law in Ireland today is not Irish law, However just it might be, it was once most unjust. It does not command reverence nowadays as a native institution, but merely respect as a necessary part of the machinery of government or something like that. So here you have these two like legal minds, and they're talking hundreds of years apart. And so when John Davies in 1600s was talking about Ireland, he said, "There is no nation of people under the sun that does love, equal and indifferent justice better than the Irish." And then a couple of hundred years later, you have a barrister saying, like, Irish reverence for the law doesn't stem from sympathy with crime or wrongdoing in general. So why am I sharing this with you? Because I want to juxtaposition the difference between these two legal systems. That when Sir John Davies, and by the way, I should say that it was in the 17th century, which is when John Davies, the start of the 17th century, that's when the penal laws came in. And so these laws that we've had, we didn't just give them up voluntarily, you know, they were beaten out of us. And because I should say as well that the flight of the Earls happened in 1605, I think, in the early 17th century. And basically it was that system that supported this these Brehons to go traveling around and all of that sort of stuff. So to come back to your point, or to the question that you asked me, I do think it's very important that we feel justice is being done. And until we feel justice is being done, we will have an innate disrespect for the law, an innate uncomfortableness with the law. So when I see things like in recent news, the guy was building a kind of a home, not a home, but like a cabin on his land, and the government is telling them to knock it down. Meanwhile, they're spending thousands and thousands building modular homes for Ukrainians. That's unjust. That's unjust. Do you know what I mean? So coming back to your question about honour price, in early Ireland, that would never happen, because a man of higher rank always got fined more than a man of low rank for the same crime. Justice wasn't blind in early Ireland. And I would argue that that's a good thing, actually. So you have let's say a kind of an illiterate farmer who's not well educated. And I'm not speaking about Ireland today, I'm talking about back then. And he has to like go against a noble or something like that. The noble was always fined more than the poor farmer for a like crime. Why? Because you're expected to know better. Your honour price was on the line. Now, I should say as well, it worked both ways. It wasn't just a one-way, single-edged sword. It was a double-edged sword, in that a crime against someone of a higher rank would always entail a higher fine than if it was against someone of a lower rank. Why? Because the honour price comes into it at every angle or every opportunity. So it's like if I'm a lord, or if I'm a low-level prince or something like that, and a farmer down the road, he, I don't know, steals my comb or something like that, he would have to pay me more than he would if he was going to repay like someone of the same rank or status as him. So it worked both ways. Now, I should say as well that in Ireland, with honour price, there was a lot of expectations that came with that. There was a lot of duties that went with that. And some of those duties were to maintain the roads, yeah, to fund a local hostel that was free for travellers, yeah. So it wasn't like you didn't have any duties. And that's where social welfare would come into play, because the king, okay, you weren't defined by how much money you had, you were defined by how much you could afford to give away. And that's why I said earlier that the nobles are called fla. And what's the Irish for generosity? Flahuil. That's why, and that's the reason why, because if a noble didn't give you food, they would lose some of their status, they would lose their honour price. So it was very rigid and it was very regimented, I should say, on what the roles were and what the duties were. And I don't think there was any such thing as rights, because that's a more modern invention, right? That's like a new Western philosophy thing. But there was definitely a lot of duties, and yeah, and honor price was the way that you could the way that you could manage that.
Yeah, you brought up something I think quite important there, and I think it resonates with everybody on the space here this evening. The sense of justice. Even in 2025, when you see all these court cases up and down the country, and you see judges, imparting, different rulings to people, and when you know within your soul that the person got off on a light sentence, he should have been
Yeah,
punished, harder. It resonates and it makes you angry, and it's just so unreal that that's part of our psyche, that we respect the law, and if I do wrong, I expect to be punished, adequately for the crime that I've done. And we have a sense of right and wrong, and if you do wrong, you hold your hands up and you take the punishment. And I think in today's world, we have a lot to learn from our ancestors. And I thought that point there, it truly did resonate with me, because it's something that resonates with us when we hear all these stories up and down the country, and we see injustice being done to our people, and it goes through you, and it's part of who we are, the sense of right and wrong. So that was very, very important point that you brought up there. That is something now that really, really gets to me. It really gets really deep to who I am as a person. And
yeah,
just kind of on a side note as well, I think it's very, very important, this conversation that we're having. I know we're talking about Brehon laws, but I think our true history has been taken from us. And if you don't know who you are as a people, how can you thrive in the society, And by the fact we're having this conversation, there's an awful lot of points. I'm sure people at the end of the chat between ourselves that will bring up certain points as well, that, it resonated with them. But also as well, Kevin, I'd just kind of like to touch on the role of women under Brehon law and in
yeah.
the society at the time. Could you give just kind of a kind of a window into life for a woman back in ancient Ireland during those times?
Yes, I can. And let me just preface that by saying we're talking about a wide time frame here. And do you remember I said at the start of the call that these laws and these stories were written down by monks? So that suggests that everything we know of women was in the post-Christian period, let's say that. But then when you read the mythologies, that's where you find women as goddesses. That's where you find the likes of 𝗰𝗵𝗶𝘀 and Fóla, who greeted the Milesians when they arrived on the island, and each of them petitioned them to give them like the name, like call Ireland after me. And they were married to the last three kings of the 𝗃𝗏 𝗃𝗏𝗃, 𝗵𝗃, 𝗵𝗃t, and 𝗵𝗃na. And just so I can translate them, 𝗵𝗃 means son of the hazel, right? And hazel signifies wisdom, because if you remember the story of the salmon of knowledge, they were in Connacht as well, and they were eating the hazels that dropped into the water, and that's how they got that wisdom. 𝗵𝗃t means son of the plow, right? So this is implying like the fruits of the land, okay? And 𝗵𝗃na is son of the sun, not like the grandson, but son of the sun, because Graina is the sun. And Banba was married to 𝗵𝗃. Fóla was married to Mechecht, and Migraine was married to Iru. And I won't like share all. Do you want me to share all the dialogues, or will I just share areas?
Just share areas.
Yeah, okay. So they're on the hill of Ishnock, and the three sisters are there. Banva petitioned them, Fáil petitioned them, and then Iru stepped up and says, I am Iru, queen of this realm, wed to Migraine, the king of light. Warriors of Meal, you shall take this land, for it is destined. But I ask that my name be given to it forever, Iru, from which era shall come. If you grant this, your people will thrive here for generations. And Emergin, who was the chief kind of druid of the Milesians, said, Noble Iru, your name shall be chief among the names of this land, for your words ring true. Era it shall be. There's another court case. So we're going back a little bit more now. This is two ahead of Danann, but if we go back to the Partholonians, who, according to the Lereg of Alla Éireann, they were the second group that came to Ireland. And this is actually where you can imagine the old Brehons look into this story as a reference to guide their judgments. Basically, Partholon arrived on the island and he liked to go hunting. So he went out with his men and he went hunting. But while he was away, he left his wife Delgnat at home. And she shares a drink of his ale with a servant called 𝗃𝗶. And this act symbolized intimacy or infidelity. So Partholon comes home from his hunt and he sips on his little cup, magical cup, and possibly by tasting the ale and recognizing the traces of Delgnat and 𝗃𝗶, he becomes enraged. And in his fury, he takes the law into his own hands and kills the dog. It's an act that destroys something of value tied to Delgnat. So Delgnat challenges Partholon's reaction, arguing her case, stating that if you leave milk before a cat or honey before a child or a woman alone with a man, how can you expect them not to partake? The fault is yours, Partholon, for leaving me in such temptation. So they went to court, and even though the Brehon isn't named, the judgment was, he basically said, yeah, there's a loss here, and the husband owes the wife restitution. And the judgment said, and that without deceit is the first judgment in Ireland. So that hence, with very noble judgment, it is the right of the wife to recover against Partholon. Now, this, I want to just say two things here. Oh, I should say, as restitution, he had to give her an island. And what do you think she named the island? She named it 𝗃𝗵𝗃𝘀, which is after the dog. The dog's name was 𝗃𝗵𝗃. And that island still exists, and it's up in Donegal. So this, I don't know what I'm trying to say here. Is this like evidence that they existed? I'm not so sure about that, but the point I want to make here is that this is emphasized as the first case in Ireland, that it is the right of the wife to recover against the husband. So this was apparently, allegedly, in the pre-Christian times, but because it was written by monks, okay? So we have to keep factoring that in. We can't divorce that from our mind, that the monks are writing this down. And I don't know why they're doing it, because the Catholic Church, let's say, once the Catholic Church became stronger, that's when you start to see the status of women diminishing. Whereas before, they were seen to be goddesses, and in order for the king to be the king, he had to do a ceremonial marriage to the goddess of sovereignty, which was the land, right? So he had to marry the land in this kind of like sacred ceremony. So yeah, then the Christians came along, and I think it just started to deteriorate from then on, to the point where like a woman's testimony wasn't like, she couldn't testify if let me think what I'm trying to say here. The woman's honor price was tied directly to her closest male relatives. Now that could be her father before she's married, it can be her sons when she's elderly, and it can be her husband when she's married. There is a caveat to that I'll get to in a second, but basically, if the woman went out into the society and she caused harm, it would be the husband who pays for it. Remember I said that it fell to the clan in the second degree, so it would always be the husband that would pay for it. Now, to come back to the caveat, that was only the case so long as the woman honor price, or the woman's status was lower than their closest male relatives. However, they could, educate themselves. There was no prohibitions from women educating themselves. Now, I'm saying this as a man in the 21st century. I don't know what it was like back then. I'm sure that even though there was no prohibitions, it wasn't easy for women either. And that's when the church actually became like a sanctuary then for those women, because they could go to the church and have a status that was relatively higher than what they would get in the normal society as a householder, as a housewife or whatever. So that's why I think when St. Patrick arrived, a lot of the noble women, they were, giving him gifts and stuff like that, because I think that they saw in him their way to have a higher status, to be respected as they were in their own right. And as time went on, then the status of women just deteriorated until you get to, because women were able to fight on the battlefield alongside the men until 𝗲𝗺𝗺 came along. 𝗲𝗺𝗺 was a saint, or he's Saint 𝗲𝗺𝗺. He came, I think it was like in the few centuries after St. Patrick, and he wrote, I think he wrote the life of St. Patrick or the life of 𝗁𝗵𝗶𝘀. I can't remember, but anyway, he wrote a biography of one of the earlier saints. And what happened was, his mother, she witnessed the battle, and she seen like the women in the battle like ripping the hair off each other, and she she petitioned her son, right? And if anybody knows, I'm sure all of you have Irish mammies, right? In the chat here. So basically, he made the law, which was called the Law of Innocence, which protected children and women and the clergy, of course, from being an injured party in battle. So if women or children or clergy got injured in battle, guess who came in and took the compensation? The church. And that's the first time where we have an example of a third party external to the case, right? An institution coming in and saying, you've injured the children, or you've injured a woman, you've injured the priest, now you owe the church money. And that was unheard of prior to 𝗲𝗺𝗺. So, but then again, right, if I'm going to fast forward now to like the modern era, the recent modern era, and you had the likes of Come on the Man, right? You had Constance Markievicz, you had like Maud Gonne. These are all like very powerful women, that the reason why we had the first female member of parliament is because women were revered in the past. Women were held to a high regard in the past. So and I think we had the first female president as well, and this was unheard of in other countries. I could be wrong about that, but I believe that Mary Robinson was first female president. But anyway, that's besides the point. The point I'm trying to make is that we still have a lot of respect for women, and you see it in the protest movement. You see it in, like, I'm looking at the videos that are coming out, and remember what was it? Something like 𝗃𝗵𝗶𝘀, and dissident mammies, or something like far right mammies. I think that's what it was. Yeah. like it's the women with the buggies who are, you know, at the front of the protest now, and I think that's arguably a good thing, because it harkens back to how we were in the past. If the woman would be sent in, they would have been sent in first, and if they can't do it, well, then the men can step in behind them. So this is a call out to all the men who are listening. You know, just get ready and be willing to protect the women in your life. I hope none of that was sexist.
I have a question for you there till we get her back in. Just Patricia, pop out and pop back in there, and I'll bring you up. What was the Brehon laws where the guys, if someone wronged you or something, or didn't pay the money, they'd be sitting outside the house, or you know anything about that?
Yeah. That's called trosgood. I'm glad you asked me about that. So let's just take a step back for a moment. Like, we're talking about law here, but we haven't defined what was a crime in the eyes of the early Brehons. And it was very simple. There was one sentence: a lapse in the standards of personal honor and brotherly kindness. So with that being said, basically trosgood was a method for compelling a stronger party to justice. And how this worked was, you would have, let's say I'm a poorer farmer and you're a noble, and you had like stolen my coat, or you'd wronged me in some way. If I wanted to take you to court, I would have to go through a ritual called trosgood, which is basically fasting from dawn till dusk outside your property. Now, if you ate during that time, the amount of money that you would owe me doubled. So there was a financial incentive for you to, you know, comply. There's a financial incentive for you to comply and give me justice. But what happened is, over time, this became a necessary step in the legal procedure. So basically, the remedies that were available was called distraint, which basically meant that I could seize your property, or I could seize your animals, but I had to do that over the course of like several weeks or something like that, right? For a non-noble class, okay, so not the Fla, not the Nemed, but like the lower classes, it became necessary step that I would like fast outside your house. So this is interesting, because I remember reading about this and I was like, that's amazing, because who here is old enough to remember the hunger strikers? I'm sure we all know who I'm talking about now, the H Block hunger strikers, Bobby Sands and all those lads. And it's like, I just thought that I didn't think about it too much. But then I realized that, like, oh, they're getting that from Brehon law. They're taking that from our history. And it just like fits so well. You have these men who were fighting for their country, and they're being imprisoned by a crown. And so they decided to fast. And, you know, some of them died as a result of that fast. And what I found interesting in my research is that in India, they also have this idea of fasting for justice. It would be common, not that it's common, but like you would see it when it's like a soldier and he's fasting on the king because he hasn't been paid wages, or this sort of thing. So yeah, it's interesting that you talk about the links between Ireland and India. I'm very interested in that, because even in the language, like, did you know that Sanskrit is closely related to Old Irish? And there's a lot of theories for this. Is that like Arianism? There's a theory that at some point that the Aryan culture spread out from India, or maybe it spread out from Ireland. It depends on your perspective, right? But only in the middle of that is where you'd have all the mixing. So if you can imagine the world is like a bowl, and India is on the edge of one side and Ireland is on the edge of another side, but in the middle of that bowl you have a lot of mixture going on. So that's why in continental Europe, yeah, they're Indo-European languages, but they're not as close to the Indo as Irish is. So let me give you a few examples of that. In Ireland, we would say Ara for a noble person, and in India they say Arya. Okay, it just means a noble or a wise person. It doesn't necessarily mean a white man. But Hitler got the wrong idea with that, I think. And you have in Ireland you have Brehon, and in India you have Brahmin, and they would essentially be thought of as the same type of officer. You know, they have a function that they perform in society. The Brahmin is performing like spiritual rituals, while the Brehon is doing legal rituals. And that comes back to what I was saying earlier. And I'm not sure if I answered that question properly, but that's why the Irish followed them, because when the Brehon was speaking, they thought they were in the presence of a priest, and they were in the presence of a priest because that man who was speaking would have been a Druid hundreds of years earlier. So the other thing I wanted to say is, if you know, Krishna in India is a god, and he has a form where he's basically a cowboy. He's a cowherd, and he has all these like women around him, like they're called gopis. But basically, in his form as a boy who minds cows, we call him Govinda. Okay, and then you look at the boyin. The Irish for the boyin is 𝗏𝗶𝗀. And they're exactly the same words, because go in India means a cow, and vin means like a bright and blonde, and you know, this sort of thing. Like it implies the same meaning as 𝗏𝗶𝗀, which is the river in Ireland. So it's like when you say Govinda, you're basically saying 𝗏𝗶𝗀. And I'm very fascinated by those sorts of connections, and especially when I learned that, oh, this is just what we're doing in Ireland. Hunger strike is what they do in India when they want to find justice. And the method of that is called Troscud.
I'm back. I don't know what happened with there. I kept getting kicked out like completely, and then I couldn't find the spaces. It was really weird. But I'm back again, Kevin. Just kind of my last kind of conversation with you there, where we're talking about women during that time era, and I was just wondering, what was Brehon Law's approach to marriage and divorce?
These are great questions, Patricia. Thank you. There was a number of types of marriage in early Ireland, and it depended on a lot to do with property. So if you were a free man, and that's what I should have said, 𝗵𝗵𝗶𝘀 means the law of the free men, the free land tillers. If you were a property owning free man and you married a property owning free woman, that was considered the highest form of marriage. Because remember I said earlier in this call that families were a little bit like companies. So that's the way to kind of go into this, that it was a very economic reality behind it. And so for example, if the next level would be a woman without property on the land of the man who owned the property, that wouldn't be the same status as the first marriage I entered, where it's equal. It's an equal partnership. And that goes all the way down to a coupling, which is what they call it. Like it's called Cain Lánamh, right? That's the text, and it means the law of coupling. And it goes all the way down to the lowest status is like two insane persons. So I think that it had a lot more to do with like the physical act than actually, you know, ceremonial. And there wasn't as much of a how can I say this? Like, it wasn't considered as big a deal as we consider it today, where you kind of get married and that's for your life. because it was easy to get married and it was easy to get divorced. What do I mean by that? Well, they had a such thing called handfasting, which was a trial marriage. And how did you form a trial marriage? You just basically had an agreement with somebody in front of witnesses, and you were married. And the witnesses were important because they had to, like, you know, put their hand on put their hand on their heart and say, I witnessed that these two people have made a commitment to each other, verbal commitment. So you had trial marriages that lasted for a year and a day usually, and then they could just undo it. They can just decide, like, I don't want to live with her, she's doing me head in. And you could go and find another wife, you know what I mean? And I should say on this note, the foster children was a big deal as well, because all children were celebrated. It wasn't like there was no bastards in early Ireland, unless you were like you could have like an unrecognized son, okay, but that seldom ever happened. If say if I had sex with a woman on like the full moon or whatever, and then 9 months later she came and brought me a child and said, this is your child, if I recognized that child, they would be entitled to become an heir of my family. There was also laws around if a man raped a woman and she became pregnant, he had to pay for it, which is kind of interesting. When coming to divorce, then, the way you could get divorced in Ireland was the same way you could get married. You just basically had to say, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you, and turn around and walk away. Because there was no paperwork in this. There was no marriage certificates. It was really just a question of, you know, what was convenient at the time. But I should say as well that the grounds for a woman could divorce her husband. A woman could easily initiate divorce against her husband if he turned out that he was impotent, if he put on weight, if he turned out to be gay. She could divorce her husband on those grounds. But the husband couldn't divorce the wife if she put on weight, you know, or if she was barren. I think that he could divorce her if she was barren, because, and this is a really important point, the purpose of marriage was to produce heirs for the company, for the family. That was the purpose of marriage. So I just want to backtrack a little bit, because I something popped into my head and I didn't get to say it previously, but when I was talking about St. Patrick, I meant to mention St. Bridget as well. Now, Bridget, I just found this out recently. Her name, Bríd, it means exalted one. And there's some evidence to suggest that there was more than one Bridget. Now, I'm not talking about the goddess Bridget, but yeah, there was a goddess Bríd as well, which is the exalted one. And she was a triple goddess in the two-headed Dan and the three sisters, all with the same name. But then, like years later, a child was named after the goddess, you know, and she went on to become a great saint in the monastery, an abbot, actually, an abbess. But the thing was, when she, even though she set up the monastery, and even though she was considered like the master of the monastery, there was another like individual who was a man who was the abbot. So it seems like even in the church at those times, there was an unwillingness to share power with women.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. Could you tell the listeners here the concept of Éric Fine, that penalty payment system, and how it can show us the justice, how it was operation in early Ireland?
Éric Fine, yeah. So this is similar to another word, which is vergil. Now, let me just say a few things about that, because it's important. The word were actually means man. So when you hear the word werewolf, it means man-wolf. And guild means money. Okay? So another way to interpret this word, wergild, is body fine. But in Irish they called it Eric, Iraq. And it was a payment made by an offender of the king in the cases of homicide or other grave offences. And this was distinct from what we were talking about earlier, the honour price. It's distinct from that because it's tied to an individual's social status and applied to a broader range of wrongs. So it's specifically a body price. It was the price that you paid for wounding a body.
If you could bring one law from the Brehon time period into today's legal system, what law would it be? Or if you have to throw them out there.
So let me just come back to the Eric fine again, because I don't think I explained it well enough. I mentioned that it's for homicide, but it would also be applied for severe injury that, you know, effectively killed a person's social standing. So if you were a harp player and you lost your fingers and that was my fault, then I would be encouraged to pay, or I would be ordered to pay the Eric fine, because it wasn't just tied to your body and your life, it was tied to your status as well. So to come back to your question, what law would I like to bring? Okay, so there's quite a lot actually, and I think I would bring back a judicial market opening. So what's that mean? It means that you don't have this like you don't have a bar association, you don't have a guild of judges, okay, that you can't choose who they are, even if they have a bad reputation inside or outside the court. You can't do anything about that. So what I would like to see is to do away with all of that and basically have a judicial market opening, which means that you would have judges competing amongst themselves, okay, on the basis of their reputation and the basis of their historical history of making fair and true judgments. I think that that's something that I would love to see coming back, simply because I think it would radicalize and revolutionize how law actually happens, and you would start to feel justice coming back into Irish society, because, you know, a lot of judges out there are being very lenient on, you know, images on computers and hard drives, you know what I mean? And I don't like that. That kind of upsets me. It makes me a bit sick. And I would love if I could have the power to choose my own judge. The next thing that I would bring back is honor price. And for the reason of this, right? We have a Taoiseach, and Taoiseach means fucking chieftain. And the Tanistry means a Tanist. And that comes from early Irish culture, that comes from early Irish society. And the Taoiseach is another word for chieftain. And the Tanist was another word for the second in command. So how it worked in early Ireland, remember I said that you had to have the support of your people to be the king. Well, in order to, in an effort to prevent disputes between rival regrant, which is like the people who have the quality of the king, so they could be the next king, in order to avoid disputes in event of the death, the Tanistry, which literally means like the second in command, was picked during the lifetime of the king. And that removed the risk of like factions in the event of, you know, the king's death and on an untimely death, you know, if he died all of a sudden and the heir wasn't chosen. Now, the reason why they didn't have Tanistry over in the UK and on the continent is because they knew that it was going to be the firstborn child. But in Ireland, it could have been any of your cousins, it could have been your uncle, it could have been, it was always a man, but that's neither here nor there. It would always be somebody in your kin group who had the eligibility to be called the king. If that wasn't determined before the king died, what do you think might happen? Yeah, exactly. You're going to have disputes. You're going to have conflict. So it was a way to avoid that. And I should say that there's a lot of evidence of things like that in the Brehon law that made it self-executing, that you didn't need the state to enforce it because it was self-executing. You have a Taoiseach there in the Dáil. You have the Tanistry, and the Dáil is an Irish word for a gathering. It's an assembly. It's also a word for a tribe or a family, right? So you had like Dáil Riada up the north and all of these things. So the Dáil is kind of a mockery, and the Taoiseach is a mockery, and the Tanistry is a mockery of our old Irish system. So what I would like to see is that they get held to a higher account, and that I should say that there was exile. Exile was an option in the early Irish law, and like I would like to see the Taoiseach and the Tanistry and all of those shower up in the Dáil there to be exiled, and that could only be done when you have honor price. So I think they're the two laws that I would like to see come back.
Oh, I think your sentiment would everyone on the space here would agree with you. Some might even go a bit harsher, but we'll be good. We won't go any further on that. And my final question for you, Kevin, you've been absolutely a legend. I've learned so much from you here. What might have been the biggest challenges for someone living under Brehon law?
Okay, well, there's so much more I could like talk about, you know what I mean? And I would say the biggest challenge would be if you were disowned by your family, or that you could basically, like, slavery existed. That's just a matter of fact. Like St. Patrick was a slave, don't forget. Um, so like that's something that could be considered a big obstacle. But I just want to be clear that I'm not talking about slavery as in like the sort of slavery that we've seen in America where people are treated like property. I think it was a little bit more kinder than that, I would say. And like this actually comes up in like the hostages as well, right? There was a such thing called Carja law, which if anybody speaks Irish, you know that Carja is the Irish for friendship, but it actually means a treaty. And what would happen here is that you would have an overking, and then you would have a couple of underkings, and the underkings would offer the overking a relative from their own family as a hostage, okay, as a hostage to, in the event of an intertribal dispute, the king, the overking, would have their hostages, you know, and that would compel the two underkings' families to engage in peace together. So we might look at that in our comfort of thousands of years later and go, isn't that awful? But there was very good reasons for why they did that. There were practical reasons, there were social reasons, and that allowed for those self-executing mechanisms to come into play. You've heard of Niall of the Nine Hostages, right? Well, his name was Níl ní Ghealach, and that word Gial is the Irish for hostage, but it's also the Irish for pledge. It's also the Irish for pledge. Now, there might be some slight pronunciation difference in it, but essentially that word Gial is the Irish for hostage, but also for pledge. So they would offer these pledges, i.e. hostages, to each other when they were engaging in contracts in order to make sure that the other family, you were trying to compel them to justice, and there was no police force. You couldn't ring the sheriff or the police if they didn't comply. So you would have something that they wanted back, and they would have something that you wanted back. So that would generally lead to compliance.
I was just wondering how you fixed for time, because I know
Oh,
we went in depth quite quite a lot there.
yeah.
Are you able to field the
Honestly,
question from the audience?
yeah, I'd be very happy to do that. Thank you.
Good stuff,
Yeah,
Kev.
if anybody has a question, or Gavon, if you want to throw a question there while the audience are putting up their hands.
Yeah, I don't know if you covered it there already. Where do you think the origins of it came from? I know you mentioned the Vedic and the over there, but like, is there any lore around who brought the Brehon to Ireland, or is there any folklore from where it came out?
I want to say 𝗰𝗵𝗶𝘀, which is a mythological character, but then a lot of people attribute like the written down law, excuse me, to St. Patrick. Now, the only record of that was written down like 300 years or something. So St. Patrick came in the 5th century, but these laws didn't get written down until like the 7th century or something like that. So I would say that these are much, much older than writing being on the island. And there's a lot of mythological characters who are credited with like bringing the law to the country. So but it evolved over time. So that lad I was talking about, that king, the High King I was talking about earlier, 𝗁𝗵𝗶𝘀, he actually wrote, well, he's credited of writing the Book of 𝗃𝗁, which is kind of like the civil injury law, personal injury law. So you have these different like mythological figures that are attributed to giving us texts, manuals, and so on. But we know for a fact that this was an oral tradition, and we don't know how far back that oral tradition goes because nobody wrote it down. But I would say, this is why I mentioned the monks a couple of times, you have to ask yourself, why did the monks feel the need to write this down? Were they trying to preserve the culture, or did they make it up, or did they were they trying to preserve the culture, or did they make it up, or did they have another agenda into it, right? Like, for example, to kind of mock these old stories and so on. I tend to think it's kind of a mixture of all of them, where they were writing down oral traditions, and they were doing it in a way to preserve that story, right? Now the monks that I'm talking about here, if you go back a few hundred years, like before St. Patrick, they were the scholars, they were the 𝗁𝗵𝗶𝘀, they were the druids, they were the priests of the old religion. So I think that there's a little bit of a mixture here of them wanting to preserve the culture. And isn't it a good thing that they did? Because if they didn't, I wouldn't have anything to talk about.
Definitely, 100%. Yeah, that 𝗰𝗵𝗶𝘀 is an interesting character, because I know the British Israelites, they said that, he was the prophet Jeremiah and he came with 𝗵𝗵𝗄 and all that stuff. And then obviously, you've got, it kind of goes back towards that, it's interesting. But yeah, it's heavy stuff. It's the Irish history, there is something special about Ireland. I think that's why they have us marked for destruction, and they have many times they've tried to get rid of us over the millennia. They haven't been able to do it yet, so let's hope they won't be able to do it this time. I see people's hands going up. That's the right thing, lads. Stick up your hands there so I know who to go to next. There is a few there, and just give the space a retweet, lads. Karen, I think your hand went up there first, so go to you, Karen.
Thanks, Kevin. Great space, Kevin. It's lovely to hear you talking. I watched a video of yours a while back, and I knew the minute I heard your voice, I went scrolling through my YouTube, and you said something in a lecture you gave, I think it was a few years ago, about Tanistry. And I thought it was really, really interesting. And just what you said, I'd love you to elaborate on it. What you said in the video was, when Tanistry ended in 1608, correct me if I'm wrong now, 1608, and it was after the flight of earls, and the threat that the monarchy made against what was left of the people on the land was that hand over the title to the land and we'll give you back your power. Now, can you elaborate? I listened to it again, so that's roughly what you said. Can you elaborate on that? Because that's really interesting. And can you connect that to a allodial title and where we stand today?
Thank you so much for asking that question, because this is going to send me down like, yeah, I might be talking for a few minutes on this question, but I love that you've seen that video and you really got it. It's a lot to do with title, and the thing you're talking about is called surrender and regrant, which was a policy of I think it doesn't really matter, it was the British, where they basically said to the Irish chieftains, just surrender your titles of nobility to us. Don't call yourself a chieftain, don't call yourself a this, and we're going to give those lands back to you with one of our titles. And this is really interesting. The thing you're talking about is called the case of Tanistry, and it's from 1608. And basically, it was about the rights of a king on conquest of a new realm, and the rights of the inhabitants of conquest. So, and this has got a lot to do with the introduction of common law, English common law, into Ireland, and the extinguishment of Brehon law. And as I said, that was in 1608, so it's early 17th century here. And basically, there was a dispute between two clans, and one clan was claiming they had a right to the land through the custom of Tanistry, and another was claiming that they had the right to the land through primogeniture because he was married to to somebody who also had a claim, but it was a woman, which is interesting because even though we in Ireland had a high regard for women, this man who was claiming that his wife had the right, and he therefore claimed to have the right because his wife had the right. Now, to come back to the title, it's like this, right? Title is property. And if you have the title of mayor or earl, and it goes to the eldest born child, then that title, that property, never really stops existing. It's continuous. It passes down through from person to person. Now, with Tanistry, which I should say the guy who I talked about earlier, Sir John Davies, who was the Attorney General, he described as a barbarous custom. Okay, so he didn't like the Brehon law at all. That meant that, like, you didn't know who was getting that title next, so you didn't have a contract that continued for that piece of land that you're after getting from the Tanist. So even if the Tanist or the chieftain, that's what I meant to say, the chieftain had a contract with the crown, and then he died, that contract died with the chieftain. And of course it would, because how can the chieftain make a contract that's going to bind all of his tribe in perpetuity? And that's where the allodial title comes in, because Britain needed to do this. They said that they, in law, in property law, there's a maxim that the law abhors property in a vacuum, which means it has to be owned by somebody. And with Tanistry, it wasn't clear who the successor was going to be. So you'd have a lot of cases where the chieftain would make an agreement with the crown, and then he would die. But the agreement didn't continue to the next Tanist, right? And that's why they were calling this custom a barbarous custom, because property was not consistent. So this actually brings me up to the modern day. We're talking about title, and I don't know if anybody on the call remembers 𝗵𝗵𝗶𝘀. Years ago, it was a website, it was a community, online community called 𝗵𝗵𝗶𝘀. And this was largely based around the concept of title. What does it mean? It's like if you're getting, and Gavin and Patricia, if you want me to change the subject, just say so. If you're getting a summons through the door, or your driver's license, or your passport, or your tombstone, your name always appears on all caps. That's a concept in law called capitis diminutio maxima. Capitus means status. It's a maximum loss of status. So whenever you see your name in all caps, that's not you, the physical flesh and blood human being. That's a corporation that has the same name as you. And so when you're getting a summons to go to the court, you're essentially getting that corporation is being summoned to court. And here's the thing, right? A thing can only have power over that which it creates, right? That's a maxim of law. So the government created a company, basically a legal entity, and it gives it the same title that you're named, that your parents name you. And that's the birth certificate. If you look back, when did your contract with the state begin? It began when your parents registered your birth. Even the word registration means to give over to the king, Regis. So that's what I have discovered in my research, and I've studied law, right? So I can vouch for this. Basically, if you were to ask somebody, when does your relationship or obligation with the state begin? Why are you doing what they tell you to do? It's because they're actually applying those laws, the legislation, to the corporation that they made at your birth. And so when you get summoned to the court, they're summoning that entity, and they do have the right to put laws and legislation onto that entity, but you don't have to you don't have to necessarily create joinder by saying, yes, that's me. And this is why they will always say, these are the charges, do you understand? And you go, yeah, I understand, but it doesn't mean do you comprehend, it means do you stand under? Do you stand under? Do you give me consent to be over you in this case? So I'm going to stop there because I can feel myself getting excited. But I hope that answered your question, Karen. If you want to ask another one.
What a brilliant answer. I'd love you to elaborate. But so what you're saying is when Tanistry ended, a loyal title began, and that's when the court system was established in Ireland. That was the point. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly
where
what I'm saying.
That's where Brehon law ended, and we became objects of registered objects to the crown. And our land. And our land. And do you believe our land still is?
That's a good question. I believe that the how can I phrase this in a PC way? I believe that we didn't get independence when Ireland was free, because and that's why the Queen had to come here within 99 years to reclaim that title. Because she was the first monarch to be here within 100 years, and it's like 100 years and a day the title expired. Anyway, I'm getting a bit like into the weeds here a little bit, but I want to say this as well, like the case of Tanistry, it was never resolved. Like they didn't. They have. They said things like, basically, there's a custom like Tanistry in Wales, I think, which is called 𝗃𝗿𝗀𝘀, and it was identical in custom. And this court case is studied in law, in property law, to talk about what were the rights of the natives. What are the rights of the natives? So this is the thing. The Brehons were like, but you're doing 𝗃𝗿𝗀𝘀 in Wales, so why can't we do Tanistry here? So excuse me. But the reason why they couldn't do Tanistry in Ireland is simply because of what I explained previously, because the title wasn't like passed to the next heir, the next of kin, let's say. So yeah, it was basically passed around to who was the most appropriate.
It was stolen. Let's be honest. It was stolen. Okay. I'm sorry. I can't say quite anymore. My hand's been up. The royalty of the crown are still over Ireland. We have all the evidence of it. We had King Charles coming down here to Waterford after his mammy died, and he broke the cane over her coffin. Like, if anyone is watching and aware of the One World Order stuff, who he's leading, and broke the crown. But the crown, which I have known for 10 years, are still over all the south of Ireland. And we've had him down here. I had King Charles standing in front of me as a Kilkenny councillor, and my blood boiling at his pedophile in front of my face, that I looked in his eyes and saw and know what he is. So I will not be silenced on this. The crown is over the south of Ireland the whole time, with the fucking Sinn Féiners out there thinking, and any thing.
Thanks, Melissa. We're kind of keeping it on the topic there. We're trying to keep it on topic and ask questions. Let me see. I think it's Miranda. You're up next, or Miriam, is it?
I just want to know it. I didn't even know that Brehon existed until tonight, and he started talking about
Oh,
it.
wow.
It's actually fascinating to read the laws. I mean, a woman wasn't entitled if the man didn't have an heir. The woman wasn't entitled, but there were some wonderful things as well, like, you know, the husband. Oh my God, I've never known this in my life. I must have been born in a box.
No, you weren't born in a box. You were born in a conquered country.
Yeah, in a
And
cradle.
I just want to say something on that, because it's like, it'd be like us finding out tomorrow that we have
Yeah.
GAL. It'd be like us finding out tomorrow that we have a language, right?
Correct.
And I think that you're actually a prime example of why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I know that there's a lot of people. You're not alone. I can't see your name, but I'm assuming it's Miriam or something like that.
It's Miriam, yeah.
You're not alone in what you're thinking, and that's why the Brehon Academy exists.
No, but I'm reading something here, and this is absolutely fascinating. I'm actually intrigued. Marriage is one of the most important areas in Brehon law, right? Firstly, it would be considered a crime for anyone to harm an unmarried mother in such a way as to prevent damage or chances of a marriage.
Yeah.
A great crime to cut a woman's hair, right? As in ancient Ireland, long hair was a sign of beauty, right? Love that, right? And then your first wife, even if you left her, right, and married the second wife, the first wife was still entitled to everything. Bring it back.
Yeah, I should say that, especially like in the pre-Christian era, like polygamy existed. It existed for men and for women. So you have the case of 𝗁𝗆 Fáil, Grace O'Malley, who was actually a more historical figure. And she had multiple husbands, and she had multiple husbands at the same time. And she actually divorced, I can't remember his name. I think it was Burke. I think he had Fleet Rock Castle or something like that. And she basically called all her men, and she just, from the turret of the castle, she says, husband, I dismiss you. And that's how she actually took the castle as like restitution. So it was very easy. But the thing is, when you're at a higher society, like a higher class of society, it was a lot more for, you know, political reasons. There was like alliances and so on and so forth. But then when you get down, and like there's not a lot written about the lower classes, and that's interesting in and of itself, because I want to know, how did the fisherman's wife live throughout these times? But there's no information on that. So I can only assume. But when you get down to the lower classes, you can imagine that they were marrying more for love and for the bonds that they had.
Yeah, Dara, you go ahead, and then Aaron, you can go in after. Go ahead there, Derek.
Kevin, it's Dara. Delighted to hear you're well and healthy, my friend. I thought you were gone there for a while because you'd gone very quiet. But I'm delighted to hear that the operation went well.
Thank you.
I went to the Five Crosses, and I met with a man who was a local historian. And there's the 𝗁𝗵𝗀𝗀, St. Patrick High Cross there. And he said when it was readable, the writing in Latin beneath the cross, a local historian got the opportunity to translate it. And what it read was St. Patrick and 𝗁𝗵𝗀𝗀𝗀's churches conflict is now ended, and that the two churches are from here on combined And I was also up at the castle, and I got talking to the lady who was giving the presentation, and she described that in order to be King of Ireland, you had to be King of Meath, because Meath was the spiritual central place of
Yeah.
Ireland. So adding the two things together, you can see that this character, St. Patrick, makes a beeline for Meath and for this, the Five Crosses, where the monastic gates of the centerpiece, and that character, St. Patrick, is really trying to become King of Ireland at that time. What, like, I'm just adding bits to your knowledge that I learned myself straight. But the other thing is that St. Bridget she's up the road from me here in Selbridge, where Arthur Guinness is buried. So if you ever want to Google where Arthur Guinness is buried, go there. It's wonderful. It's far better than Glendalough, trust me. And it's always just vacant. So just Google that, go there this Saturday. It's a stone's throw from Dublin. But what St. Bridget does is she brings the old Druids of Ireland to Christianity, and she blessed the seeds, is what we're told. So there was the old Druid equinoxes of, let's say, Sauron, as in Halloween, would have been the second harvest, the end of the second harvest, and the end of the Celtic year, calendar year. So there's an awful lot of realignment of King, what's his name, the first Bible, into Ireland. Maybe St. Patrick has something to do with that. And let's say you see the gargoyles above the Irish churches. Well, that's all of the pagan mythology, in order to invite you, the pagan Druid, into the new Catholic Church. King James I is what I was thinking of. And also the Druids always did their mass services outside, because we were with Polaris. So Polaris is the one star in the sky that remained the same, and everything else swirled around it. And hence you see the eternal swirls at the likes of Newgrange. Just throwing stuff out there, yeah.
Can I say a few things back to what you just said there? What I find interesting is that the word kill and quill are very similar, and quill is a forest and kill is a church. So to come back to St. Bridget, Kildare is where her monastery is, her temple is, and that means the church of the temple of the oak. It could also mean like oak forest, but we have it that it's Kildare, and so that implies to me it's a temple of an oak, which definitely harkens back to the times when the Druids were knocking about on the island. Now, you also mentioned something about Tara, and to be the king, you had to be the king of Tara. Now, I've done a bit of research onto that, and that is, it's kind of it's something that pops up in the mythology, but it doesn't seem to have been in practice. Now, the Northern O'Neill clan and the Southern O'Neill clan, they were basically the kings of Tara for ages, and until Brian Boru came along, and he basically ousted them there. But the thing is, we don't have well, there's not really evidence to say that Brian Boru was king of Meath. I think that's what you're talking about. But what I would say is that there was a time in Ireland when the provinces were, no, there wasn't a time, it still is now today, called 𝗁𝗶𝗀. And what does 𝗁𝗁 mean? It means a fifth, but we only have 4 provinces. Why is that? Because Meath was the 5th province of Ireland. That's where you have Meath and Westmeath, because they were all actually the same thing. And what happened was, the English, understanding the spiritual and psychological significance of the fifth kingdom, which means the middle kingdom, by the way. An-Bhí means like the middle, and it was the fifth kingdom. But that's where you have the Hill of Tara and the Hill of Ishnok, who Fintan MacBochra described as two kidneys of the same beast. Now, who's Fintan MacBochra? You might be wondering. Fintan MacBochra was the guy who allegedly came over with the first wave of migration to Ireland, who was a granddaughter of Noah. So we're going right back here into the Bible, but he actually survived the great flood in the form of a salmon, and then he took on many different, he shape-shifted over time, you know, and he basically lived for about 5,500 years. And that's how we know the story of the pre-flood people, because he was somebody who survived the flood. And he described Ishnok and Tara as two kidneys of the same beast. And why would he do that? Well, I remember years ago, before I was into all of this, or this was probably, I was always into it, but this probably got me into it even more. We were on the Hill of Tara and we were getting a tour, and that's the first time I heard the word Ishnok being mentioned. And the way he said it was like, Ishnok is the feminine centre of Ireland. They call it the navel of Ireland, okay? Because there's the 𝗃𝗄𝗃 is there, which is the middle. They say it's like the navel of Ireland, the meeting point of the 5 provinces. And also Tara is in Meath as well. And there used to be an ancient road connecting those two sacred sites. He said that Tara was the seat of kingship. Okay, so yeah, I agree with you there, Dara, that it was the seat of kingship and rule and governance and all of that, which he said was a more male energy. But meanwhile, if you go to Ishnok, and it even sounds like Ishka, right? So, and Ishka is water, and water is connected to consciousness, and so on and so forth. And he says that's the female center of Ireland, because that's where the Druids would perform their ceremonies.
That's fantastic, Kevin. Aaron, would you go ahead, would you mind asking Kevin your question there, Aaron?
Well, not so many questions, just observations. First of all, Kevin, an absolutely encyclopedic walkthrough over the last hour. I've been enthralled, and I don't say that lightly. You know, and what's really freaking me out is somebody sent me your email address earlier on today, and I sent you an email. You'll probably look it up in an hour.
No, I actually seen it. Are you the guy who was saying that you had done rituals?
Yeah. Don't explain them online.
Okay, no.
Yeah,
I didn't realize I was talking to the same person.
Yeah,
but
how
I
about
had.
that? I didn't even realize you were going to be on Gavon's Space here tonight.
Yeah.
Era is mega. That's for fucking sure. Anyway, just another observation. We were speaking about Breach earlier on. I'm one of the few males that has been invited into the convent of the Sisters of Breach in Kildare. Very unusual. But, you know, I'm a very unusual man. As for Tara, you know about that from the email. Then going back to Partholon, the son of Noah.
No, that's not what I said. I said that the Caesarians was a granddaughter of Noah, and Partholon has some connection to the Old Testament as well. Yeah.
Yeah, there's something about that. It goes way back in time. Very, very interesting. This is deep, very deep stuff.
And do you know what else? Right? The word for sacred is Nemed, right? And the group of people who came after the Partholonians were called the Nemedians. Exactly. And so that's probably, no, it's not probably, like when you get into that level of kind of the occult history of Ireland, to use the phrase, it really starts to open your eyes to how the early Irish thought of themselves. So you had the Nemedians, who were basically translated as the sacred ones, and then followed by them. And by the way, they're having battles with the Fomorians the whole time. Okay, that's
Mhm.
that's where Halloween
They're from the
originates
north.
from.
They're from the north, probably Vikings, Norwegians, or something like that.
Well, we don't know who they are, but they're described in the mythology as monsters, and they come from the sea, and apparently they live on Tory Island, and Balor of the Evil Eye. And this is where J.R. Tolkien got the idea for his Tor Mor, right? The big
Yeah.
tower with the evil eye in it, that would look, and it would destroy everything that it looked at, right? So Balor is like a creature. He was a giant, and he had this big eye, and his men would open the eyelids. And listen to this, right? Lia Fáil Samaldanic, Lugh, the
I was
long
literally
arm.
going to mention Luke.
Yeah, so Lugh is the guy who killed him, and that was his grandson, okay? And how he killed him was with a slingshot, and he knocked his eye out. But the thing is, right, this isn't like a David and Goliath story, even though it has similarities. This is cooler because he knocked the eye out the back of his head, and the eye looked at his own army, Balor's army, and it began destroying everybody. And that's how they defeated the Fomorians.
But the interesting thing is that Lugh is a cognate from the Latin, which means light.
Yeah, looks.
So Apollo comes from the same origin. Lugh, looks, light.
Yeah. And here's one for you. Did you know that like London is if there's an
Lugh
old
Dunham.
Lugh Dunham, exactly, and that's like the fortress of Lugh.
Yeah, and
And
Carlisle as well.
excuse me.
Carlisle was also named Lugdinium or something like that in ancient times. You've got Lucerne in Switzerland. You got so many places all across Europe,
Yeah.
where this sort of consciousness spread. Man, it's been absolutely brilliant listening to you. Gavon, well done for getting Kevin Flanagan on.
That's well,
This
we have
is
to
the
thank
man.
Patricia for that one. Fair play to Patricia. I just want to say there for a second though,
Patricia, fair play to you. Fair play to you.
Kevin's
This is the
channel,
man
his
that
YouTube
knows.
channel. Hold on there, Kev. One sec. Kevin's YouTube channel. It's in the top bubble there for anyone who wants it, and it's in the
I
bottom
got
bubble.
it, man. I got it.
Give it a.
I actually emailed him today before he even knew he was on.
100%.
But
Just to get people to give him a
last thing,
sub there, and hold on.
thing.
Go on, Kev, quick.
Yeah, one last thing to Kevin Flanagan. Kevin, I am one of the very, very few people alive today that had slept 24 hours asleep in Newgrange. I'll tell you about that story again. You got the email. Let's keep in touch. And I'll pass over now to other people that want to ask you questions.
Just there's a girl there well, a person in the top bubble. Sorry, say Gavin, if you can get a chance, will you please tell Kevin hello from an old Tir-na-sor friend, Iru. I'm in work trying to listen in, so on the quiet, she said, or he said, I'm not sure. But that's a message for the other Kevin. And I think it's welcome to the abyss. Do you want to pop in there, bud?
Thanks for that, Gav. I just want to say, excellent space. It's been a great listen, and I am Kev Flanagan. I seen I'd be a fan of yours for years, and it was sorry to see your video that you made, that you obviously took a turn, and then you had your operation, stuff like that. But it's been absolutely brilliant to see you back in action. Hear you chat away. So happy days, and then thanks again for Gavin and for hosting this space. But the question I'm going to pose to you now, I'm not too sure where of any of my stuff. So I started my kind of somewhat inspired from yourself. From one video of yours that really caught my attention was the 𝗃𝗵𝗶𝘀 story about the reimagining.
When I was interviewing somebody.
Yeah, something Lia Fáil.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I know the video you're talking about.
Yeah, so that really inspired me to, like, I was always looking at history and stuff like that myself. I always had an interest in it, but obviously you're godlike genius in regard to this stuff. So what I ended up doing was I says, okay, so I'm a 𝗁𝗵𝗶𝘀 and a Northern O'Neill. Like my parents only came down to Dublin in the last couple of generations. My man's the fourth generation, my dad's like a fourth or fifth. So anyway, for people listening, what I did was I got my DNA done, and more or less the ancient migrations and the haplogroups, as well as the genealogies, have all been confirmed. More or less that they came over from, there's a Scythian migration, then there's a migration through up from Egypt on my mum's side. So that would reflect the story of the 𝗲𝗵𝗶𝘀. But in relation to what you were saying about the Indian and the Irish connection, I've done an episode on that on my own channel, and it was more or less, if I'm not too sure you're aware of this, but the 𝗺𝗲𝗺s and the 𝗵𝗵𝗶s or the 𝗵𝗵𝗇s in the Hindu mythology are directly related to the Fomorians and the 𝗃𝗏𝗏 of our mythology.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, now I was in Asia there for a couple of months myself. I've only got back the last couple of weeks, and I've an interest in ancient cultures in general, and I've seen some interesting stuff. Now I'm going to post it as I go along here, but my actual question is in relation to the Zoroastrian connection. So obviously the Persians are, you call them Aryans, and obviously you got the Hindus, they would have been deeply connected.
Yeah.
But there's a serious Irish and Irish connection there. So the Zoroastrian connection is the fire worship. So it's the Druids. So again, I'm not too sure people are aware of this, but there was Zoroastrian finds in Scotland. Now they say it was brought by Vikings, but personally, I'm more in the favour of people came out of the Atlantic, and they started from the west and migrated east, then from the east back west. That's what I think happened. But the Zoroastrian connection, I think, is the Zoroastrians and the Druids are pretty much one and the same. I'm fairly certain, like from what I've been looking. Now I'm going to divulge a bit more information once I start publishing this stuff. But there was, if a lot of people don't know, is that say Tara in Ireland, there's a Tara in Russia, and then there's a Tara in Iran as well. One is in Mandan province. And then there's also, you've got the Tara goddess. So Tara is the green goddess. She's a moon goddess or lunar goddess in Hindu mythology. So it's all these, like, as you go back to, you were saying about the Indo-Aryan languages, there's like, there's a deep connection here. And especially when you think about agriculture, like we obviously have I can't say it properly, the 𝗃𝗏𝗀𝗀𝘀. So that's the
𝗃𝗏𝗀𝘀.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then you think about I think about the white bull and the brown bull.
It's just for the other listeners, it means the 𝗃𝗏𝗀𝗀𝗀.
Yes, sorry. But that's what I was just going to ask you. Just like, have you seen these other connections? I'm after posting in the bubble there. So it's like ireann is Aryan. So there's a couple of people, other people of like the land of the noble ones. But there seems to be a serious connection here that, in my opinion, has been deliberately neglected. It's like I call it Anglo brain. I reckon that, like, it seems fairly certain now. Yeah, it's Anglo brain, because if people who are saying, "Oh no, this is a story and that's how it is," but you're like, when you actually look at it, with you just hold on a second. It's like there's something's mad here. That's why I got. And again, from listening to the likes of yourself, really got me questions. Like, and when I said this to myself, I says, hold on a second, I'm at home, I know I was able to get back in my DNA on my mum and dad's side, and we were able to find out the locations they were from. So I was able to pinpoint what two families where they originated. And as I said, it's got the DNA done. It's like, well, if this migration pattern shows the connection, like, it's crazy to think that the modern scholars have turned around and said, no, this is all, the stories are all fairy tales, it's all rubbish. But then, as it says, to go back to the actual question, is it's you're aware of the other Indo-Aryan connections. Sorry for waffling on, folks.
No, you're good. And I actually, I followed your channel before you started talking, because I seen the question in the bubble, and it says "Welcome to the Abyss" at YouTube. So I went and had a look, and I found your channel. I have heard about those connections, and I actually just wrote an article there the other day, called "The Raiders of the Lost Ark: The British Israelites and the Quest for the Ark of the Covenant on the Hill of Tara." And it's like, I don't know if you're aware of that, but in 1899 to 1902, So it was before Israel existed, but they were British Israelites. They came over and they started digging into the rat of the synods up on the hill of Tara there. Now they had a slogan that was AEIOUY, which stood for Angliae est Imperiae Orbi Universo Israelim, which means it is for Anglo-Israelites to dominate the universe, right? So they were inspired by a connection to like Masonic writings. And I wanted to ask if you had come across any of this in your own research, because I see you have a video there, Lost Tribes of Israel, Phoenicians, Brehon's Lost Tribes of Israel, Phoenicians and Scythians. So I'm just wondering, like, if you have come across any of this, like British Israelite connection.
Yeah, 100%. Sorry for cutting across you.
No,
Sorry.
it's okay. Go ahead.
No, just like I've done a couple of videos, and that there's a lot of the so in part of my getting the genetics done. So not only did I get the ancient migrations, what it connected was so the H and R1b haplogroups. Now anyone Irish who's listening to this, like Flanagan, you're one of them. I can't see any other surnames handy. But if you look at our surnames, it goes back to the Milesian genealogies, and then we're all essentially.
Fáil is another one.
Yeah, there's all noble origins, but there's a one particular image is used, and it shows the genealogy to go back to was it Zara and Abraham. I can't remember which way it worked now, but it shows the stone.
Moses was the wife, or Zara was the wife of Moses.
Yeah, but it's I think the story was the twin sons. I can't remember. It was Zara and Pharez. I can't remember the full details, but more or less it was like this genealogy showed the stone of scone. But the stone of scone went from England to went from Scotland to England, and then obviously Ireland to Scotland, and then obviously we've got a migration. So this is when I made a point on my videos. I was like, and I wanted to show this to people. It's like I'm not the only person with this migration pattern. It's like they have this stone, like also in the genealogy.
You're talking about I think you're talking about the Lia Fáil, which means stone of destiny, and that incidentally is where Fianna Fáil gets their name from, because that's warriors of destiny.
Well, it's also interesting that the oldest name that we know for the island of Ireland is the Inish Fáil, the island of destiny.
Yes, that's true.
And it comes from the book of Joshua, the stone upon which he slept as his pillow when he had his stairway to heaven dream and wrestled with God. There's all mad stuff going on. Like, I don't know. Do I really want to go into it? I'm mad enough, but there's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah. Well, as it says, sorry to cut in there again, lads, but the genetics prove it. Like as it says, I like another thing in the genetics for me was Queen Victoria showed up in my it's like a famous ancestor. So O'Neill's on my mum's side. So you can actually cross reference this against. I'll actually link it now. I'm going to link it now in a second for people to have a gander at. But it's the lineal descent of the royal family, and
that comes through Roger Mortimer, who became King of Meath in approximately 1199, about 30 years after the invasion, and he married the great granddaughter of Brian Boru, and therefore that gave the kings of England royal primogeniture, which does not count because primogeniture in the Gaelic tradition and law comes through male descent, not female descent. So the kings and queens of England based their claims in Ireland on false premises. All they've got is more power, more weapons, more guns, and we still defeat them.
Thanks, Kev. There's one other. Someone else popped.
Thanks for that. Sorry about that, lads.
Ross, did you have something there you wanted to ask?
Oh yeah, how's it going? Yeah, just like interesting conversation. I do have a question about this. Like tracing back between kind of like the Aryans and the Irish. Like, is it possible that like some of these like are like linguistic coincidences from like the Roman influence on like Britain and Ireland? Because it's commonly assumed that like ancient Latin, Iranian, and like Sanskrit are all like mother tongues of the same Indo-Aryan language. So could it possibly be that those like linguistics like similarities have trickled in from like Latin rather than like say directly into Gaelic?
Well, okay. So what I want to say is certainly there's been influence from Latin on Gaelic. For example, the days of the week. The number 7, that's the 7 days of the week. The calendar, for example. But there's also a lot of evidence of reverse influence where, for example, the word for a clock in Latin is something like horologium. Hora being like from Horus, which is the time, right? The hours is actually the same word. But the word clock actually has Irish origin if you look at the etymology of it. And the Irish for a bell is clog, and the Irish for a standing stone is clochán, and the Irish for a round tower is clochach, right? So, and clochach, I think I caught an accent there, so just in case you don't understand what those words mean, and I don't mean any offense if you do.
Oh no, like,
Basi-
I'm in America, and I'm actually like half Indian, like ancestry wise. I'm half Scotch Catholic, half Indian. So yeah.
Okay, so can you speak Gaelic? Do you have any Gaelic?
No.
Okay,
Like my family's like
okay.
from far. Like I'm like third, fourth generation Scottish American. So no, I don't speak
That's
it
okay.
sadly.
That's okay. I
But
just wanted to check because I'd hate to think I'm insulting your intelligence by telling you things you already know. But basically, what I'm trying to say here is that first thing we need to accept is, and first thing we need to acknowledge, is that Rome never got as far as Ireland. It didn't actually colonize Ireland at all, and it actually stopped at Scotland at Hadrian's Wall. Now, why did they do that? We don't know. There's a lot of different theories for that. Now, they did find Roman coin when they were excavating the Hill of Tara, so we definitely had trade with them. But you were asking about like Roman influence, and I'm saying yes, there was Roman influence. Um, but there was also reverse influence, and I've given you the example of the clog,
okay.
which we now say is a bell, but it wasn't initially a bell because we have standing stones that are called clochán, and we have what's actually translated as bell tower. It's not actually a bell tower; it's a clock shock. It's a clock house, and a clock is a timepiece. Now, why do we call a bell a clog? Because when the churches came into Ireland, they had bells, and they would ring the bells periodically throughout the day. So that's how we kept track of the time. So what I'm trying to suggest here is that the clock word it was a timepiece before it was a bell, but then later it became a bell just because that was the nature of time, how we were keeping time. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning this is because when the Swiss clockmakers, many years later, they also used bells to make the time. And I should make a little joke here. It's like there's a clue in the title of like, oh, it's 10 o'clock. The O'Clock family, they're a good family, down in Mayo. So
Yeah, that's a good one.
it's 10 o'clock. So yeah, I basically have a little spiel where I get up on the stage and I say time is Irish, and I tell them this stuff, and you can see the brain ticking, as I'm joining these dots together for them, and yeah. So what I want to suggest is that yes, Rome influenced us in some ways, but we also influenced them, and even if Rome influenced us, Rome is also an Indo-European language. So what influenced Rome is my point. And if you follow that back, I think Sanskrit is considered by many linguists to be like the mother of all Indo-European
Oh
languages.
yeah, that's pretty well known. It's pretty well known that like old like Persian, like, well, I hate using the word Persian because that's an exonym, so like I just call it Iranian language. Like Iranian, Sanskrit, and Latin are all understood to be three branches of Mother Indo-European tongue. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know if that answers your question. I hope it.
Yeah, I'll just jump in there and that.
Is.
I'll just jump in there and that. The Gaelic language is not a son or a daughter of the Roman Latin language. We are brothers and sisters languages, as in the Gaelic language and the Latin language came from the same root. The Latin language did not lead to the development of the Gaelic language. Our language is probably the oldest spoken language on earth, apart from some dialects in India.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with it. And some of those British Israelite books and the old books I have on, you know, the esoteric history of Ireland, it says that Irish is the root language, and it went into it when the letters used to be named after trees or something. It could be in the Druid book. I'd have to look into it, but I don't know how true it is. But yeah, it says that Irish could be the oldest.
Yeah, it'd be trees. Trees were always sacred.
The trees were part of the alphabet or something. I'd have to look it up anyway. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't see any more people come up there, lads. I think we're nearly for over 2 hours now. Poor old Kevin, we'll have him more now.
Yeah, I think we'll wrap it up. Kevin, you have given us a powerhouse of an interview this evening. We have learned so much stuff from you, and I'd really like to invite you back. I think we need to have a discussion on the origins of the Irish. I think it's time. There's a thirst for knowledge of who we are, and I think the conversation needs to be had at a later date. And it was an absolute pleasure having you on the space tonight. And thank you for being so generous with your time.
I'll
You're very
second that.
welcome. You're very
I'll
welcome,
second.
and I just want to thank yourself and 𝗃𝗀 for again like managing the space and giving me the invitation. I thought that I would struggle through this a little bit at the start, but we've done over 2 hours now, I think. So I'm giving myself a pat on the back, and yeah, I can't wait to hear the recording. I'm going to listen it back tomorrow or something like that. So. Just thanks again for the invitation, and if you ever want me to come back on again, the offer is open.
An absolute 𝗃𝗃𝗀𝗃.
Yeah, fantastic. You're an absolute wealth of knowledge. Unbelievable. I think, yeah, what Kevin said there, you're like a walking encyclopedia, and we definitely want to have you back. Get into some of the esoteric history of Ireland. It needs to be. A lot of people don't have a clue about the history, you know what I mean? And the stuff you even talked about there, and the Lia Fáil stone, the connections to the Hebrew Israelites, and all sorts of weird stuff. And the fact I find very fascinating is that our annals tie back into, as we said, that the book of Genesis, book of Noah, it's like the oldest text. So it's a lot for people to think over, you know, and I wonder why all that stuff isn't taught to us in school.
Book of Exodus, actually.
Well, I think you know why. It's because like the current government, like they just want to redefine Irish as like anyone physically in Ireland. Like, so yeah, you guys are going to have to like, you know, like formally define what it means to be Irish, because like they're going to try and take that away from you if you don't.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, they're not going to succeed. We shall win.
We're standing in our culture now, lads. This conversation tonight now should be the catalyst for every member on the space here to start researching, start following Kevin. And I think it was Sean that was on. Sean as well, send me a private message. I want to get you on the space as well. Any knowledge, any culture, any heritage information that anyone on the space has, this is the opportunity. This space is your space. I want us to have the knowledge of who we are as a people. And when you know who you are as a people, nobody can defeat you. You are powerful. This land is powerful. It's ours. We're not giving it up to anybody, and we're going to hold our ground like all our ancestors did, and nobody's going to take it from us.
Here. Can I have the last word, please? I just want to say, right, that what you have described, Patricia, is exactly what has motivated me to keep doing the work that I'm doing. And at times, like, it can be a bit of a slog because, you know, I'm trying to make all this new content. I'm trying to put it out. But the reason I'm doing this is because it's because I respect our culture very deeply, and I know that politics is downstream from culture, and culture is downstream from ethnicity. And so I want Irish people to understand and realize who they are and where they come from. And also to say this, we're coming from a long line of survivors. We're coming from a very long line of survivors, and they didn't know that we would be here. They didn't know that we would, you know, survive to be here now. But they did it anyway, all through the famines, through the battles, through the blood of our ancestors is in the soil itself, right? And we're the seeds that grew from that. So this is what I'm trying to do. I want people to understand that the blood that flows through their veins is part of a long, long line of ancestors. And they survived so that we could be here now. And so what are we going to do about that?
Absolutely, absolutely, 100%. The ancestors brought us here. And, you know, this is a very, very important conversation. And it's the catalyst for us to move forward.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for having me on, folks. And hopefully catch you again in the next couple of weeks or months, whenever it feels right. You know where to find me.
Thanks a million, Kev.
Absolutely, Kevin.
Thanks very much.
Absolutely, Kevin.
Thanks, Patricia.
Bye.